walking along the street in summertime, my saving grace is always headphones. I think I just can't hear the harassment most of the time. I'm like, haven't been harassed for a while, and then I'll take out my headphones and I'm like, oh, damn it.
It's there. The soundtrack's still there. The
Exactly, just ignore it.
Hello and welcome to The World as It Should Be, a podcast in which we ask our guests to tell us what they would change to help create their perfect world.
By listening to what they'd like to change, we'll hear more about who they are, what they do, and what inspires them.
This podcast is brought to you by the team behind Prima Donna, a uniquely anarchic and joyous festival of everything creative.
My name is Shona Abianca and I'm a book publicist working with some of the most thought-provoking authors writing today.
I'm Catherine Riley, a writer and the director of the Prima Donna Festival. We're delighted to be your guides on this podcast adventure. The World as It Should Be from Prima Donna.
Catriona Morton is a 24-year-old writer, activist and podcaster based in London. Catriona's podcast, After Surviving Sexual Assault, was broadcast on BBC Sounds in 2019. A 10-part series, it gave a platform to survivors of sexual abuse and assault to discuss their experiences.
Catriona is also the founder of the survivor-centred website lifecontinuesafter.com. She founded both of these platforms as a space for survivors of sexual trauma to come together to share their stories.
Catriona's book, The Way We Survive, Notes on Rape Culture, is out on the 8th of July. Catriona, welcome to our podcast and thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I know it must be really busy for you. Your book is out imminently. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, of course. So The Way We Survive is a sort of polemical piece written from my own perspective of a survivor of multiple assaults and abuses on my own lived experience, what I have endured, the sort of knowledge and wisdom that I've unfortunately gained, but I'm privileged enough to be able to express to people, and it's a commentary on our current rape culture, a lot of it focusing on the current way that the UK treats sexual violence.
And was it something you thought about for a long time?
Yeah, well, it was quite a process, quite a nice process to writing the book. I have always been a writer. My whole dream of my whole life has to be a writer. So it's quite wild that it has actually come to fruition, especially at such a young age. So that's wonderful. I started off the website first, Life Continues After. I started that in the midst of surviving my most recent sexual assault, and I'd been through therapy, I'd been through group therapy and stuff, and after the end of that, because with the way these things are, funding and everything, I think it was an 8-week course, and obviously after those 8 weeks I just felt completely lost. So I started Life Continues After as a real place for survivors to come and share. My main thing is about creativity, and especially for other writers and other, creators to share either their work or the works that have really helped them. Because for me, what has most helped me in my survival has been pieces of art. To be honest, like any piece of art, like music, especially different books and writers have really helped me. Films and TV shows have really helped me come to terms with what's happened to me and really helped me know how to talk about it to other people as well. And then I had a very romantic story of coming to the podcasting world and coming to making the podcast. One of my best friends is a producer, and I went with her to a podcasting festival, which was it's called Content is Queen, the Wannabe Podcast Festival in 2018. And long story short, I was at a panel and I'd sort of had this idea for the podcast in my head, but not really given too much thought to it. And then Carrie Lloyd, who hosts Griefcast, was on the panel. And I just sort of took it upon myself and I was like, hi, Carrie, one question is, talking about really difficult things. I've had this idea for a podcast. I asked Carrie that question. She answered it very kindly. And then afterwards, she and the other panelists were like, we really want to talk to you afterwards about your podcast idea. And when I went to talk to her about it, there was a BBC commissioner there. And essentially they came up to me and were like, let's do it. It was a few months after that until with the planning and everything to actually for the podcast to come together, but that's essentially how it happened.
It was meant to be.
I know. It's all very, very serendipitous, because then I always say when people are like, oh, how did you get into like publishing? I'm like, honestly, don't ask me. It's really annoying to ask me. It's a really annoying story because for me, it was after the podcast. A colleague of mine on the podcast went to work actually at my publishing house and had been chatting to one of the editors there. And then on my birthday in 2019, my editor messaged me on Instagram and approached me about how I felt about writing a book. And then it just sort of expanded from there. It was actually quite a different book to begin with. I was looking at like my proposal for it the other day, and the process we went through there. It's quite a different book to how it was originally planned to be myself. And I think, that just shows how I developed it over the whole year of writing it, and developing my thoughts and
So you didn't have to go through the process of pitching to lots of agents
and no, again, it's an annoying thing. Like, I feel really like
people are going to be listening.
They're going to hate me. I know. I hate myself. No, I don't hate myself. But yeah, so basically, my lovely editor at Trapeze contacted me about it, went in for a couple of meetings and stuff, discussed it, and it was all looking really good. And she was like, just to let you know, you should probably get a literary agent. And I was like, oh yeah, all right. And so she gave me some names, and then I emailed one, and my amazing agent is called Rachel at Joe Unwin. And then it took off from there. So I've been very lucky. It's sort of like an upside down version of how most people do it, I know. But for all current books, I'm still going to have to do the like proposal. I'm literally writing a proposal right now, and it's bloody difficult. I haven't totally evaded that for my future career. But
so you talked about how the book kind of evolved in the process of writing, and it's obviously a book that has like a lot of research in it. It's quite dense with theory as well as your own experiences. That kind of the thread that runs through it. How hard and time consuming and exhausting was that process of kind of delving into all that material?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm especially thinking about that at the moment as I'm writing my next book proposal, because I sort of look back at the work that I did and I'm like, how did I do this? That was a lot of work. But I think the answer to that is I also have like academic training. So I was doing my master's at the same time as writing this book in gender and cultural studies. So I really had that, was fantastically helpful, because obviously a lot of what I was reading and researching there was sort of co-constitutive to the book. So that was really helpful. And as I have academic research like experience, I sort of had the skills of how to research really efficiently and all that jazz. But also throughout the book, it is also sort of I'd say about a quarter of the book is like collections from my past notes and past things that I'd written like for myself or for the website. So it was also pulling from those spaces and knowing how to make it flow all together and be ultimately what I wanted it to be, which is the book is ultimately turned into. But it was quite time consuming. But also I signed my contract for the book deal on March 20th last year. So literally was it like a day before the lockdown actually happened? So then we were just in lockdown and it was a very horrible sort of writer's retreat, I guess, because I just had to stay inside and just had this thing. Sorry about the Yankee dude.
That's all right. It's just nice scenic. It's summertime, guys. Yeah, you can really see that you have that kind of that training and discipline in academic research, because of the way the book is so kind of robust. What is your next book going to be? As kind of in the same sort of vein, or are you going to just write a novel and just make stuff up?
Right. So my current tactic is I am going to write another nonfiction. I'm afraid it might even be a little bit deeper in the academic vibe, which I don't know how people feel about that. But and then I always have lots of ideas, but then I want to write a novel. My idea is
brilliant.
Get 2 nonfictions down and then have a great time with my novel that I want to write, which also takes some the novel idea I have will take some like ground research. I have to go to Ireland for a while, so
that's not bad, isn't it? Yeah.
No, not a bad place.
With the book you're writing now, the next non-fiction, I was really interested that at the start of the book, the current book, you say you're very caring about the reader and how they need to take care of themselves and do what they need to do in order to enjoy the book and not, let it disturb them too much. And there are lots of trigger warnings, etc. Is that something that you feel strongly about for the next book as well?
Yeah, completely. I mean, the next book, another thing to say about it is that it will be pivoting away from talking exclusively about trauma because it's been hard. It's obviously quite a lot to work on and to write about constantly. I've loved it, but I also don't really want to be completely pigeonholed in what I talk about and what I have the capability to talk about. But to answer your question, yeah, I think it's completely important. I think, in the trigger warnings, I think personally that trigger warnings for a book like this, there's actually quite a lot of discussion going on at the moment about whether books should have trigger warnings and content warnings. I think especially in a book like The Way We Survive, you kind of have to, as a matter of access, and just making it really clear to people that there's gonna be tough things in this book. And you need to look after yourself as best you can, because especially obviously the content in The Way We Survive, it could be hugely triggering and hugely distressing for some people, and what I would never want to do is just chuck people in at the deep end, and not have a way for them to feel safe and supported with reading it.
That's great. Thank you. Before we move on to your 3 things that you'd like to change to create the world as it should be, I just wanted to ask you a quick follow-up question. You said that art and creativity and TV and film and all those kind of things have been tools that have helped you along the way. I just wondered if you had anything that you'd want to recommend, anything you've watched or listened to, or people, artists, creators that you want to give a shout out to.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Things to watch. The thing is, there was actually a whole chapter on this, and it ultimately didn't make it into the book. So
really?
You should have this. Yeah. But I mean, there's tons of stuff. Actually, I know what I'm going to say. Tuca and Bertie, the cartoon by Lisa Hannawalt, who is the artist on BoJack Horseman. She has her own show called Tuca and Bertie, which is about 2 best friends who are birds, and it's great, but it got cancelled, but it's actually been picked up somewhere else now, and it's coming out. Oh my god, it's already out. Sorry, I just realised. Oh my god, it came out like 3 days ago. Oh, I'm gonna watch it. But in the first series, there is a really, really beautiful depiction of childhood sexual abuse and coming to terms with that, and it's just done in such a sensitive and such a gentle way, and I absolutely love that. In terms of other films that handle the topic of violent sexual assault really well, there's a film called The Light of the Moon by Jessica M. Thompson, that came out a few years ago. It has Stephanie Beatriz, who plays Rosa in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. But
Love
that depiction, yeah, she's
favorite character.
Yeah, mine too.
She's incredible in this film. It's a tough watch. It's about a woman who's raped by a stranger. And then it's about her afterwards. That's the main thing, that the assault happens at the start of the film, and then it's her and how she copes with it afterwards, and how all of her life is affected by it. But it's a fantastic depiction, and also it's really good to know about the filming of it, because I went to a screening of it at BFI Film Festival a few years ago, and the director, I remember, said they took such care in how they shot it as well. All the actors it was all very consent led, lots of closed sets, lots of really, really gently and carefully done with how they depict that. So,
yeah, very timely with Michaela Cole, isn't it? Thanking
exactly
the intimacy coordinator.
Yeah, completely. And of course, I May Destroy You is one of the best shows ever in. So of course that as well. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on to picture your more ideal world. Do you want to talk us through the first thing that you would change about prisons?
Prisons, yes. I would abolish prisons, which actually I guess I think it's quite interesting. Unless you've read the book, you might be quite surprised if you think that that's like one of my first things I'd change. But I just think prisons are incredibly cruel, incredibly awful in how they treat human beings. They're also really defunct in the solutions that they try and find for people. Like, it's not working in the first place. For example, with like rape charges being so low, the burden of evidence that comes to survivors of any crime, but especially sexual violence. But even if it was working, it doesn't actually change anything about how our world operates. At the end of the day, it's disappearing the few undesirables who do get found out, and of course it's people from marginalized communities who usually suffer the brunt of that, those convictions. It doesn't stop the awfulness of the world. It just plainly doesn't. I think there is research that I've read, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's research that shows it doesn't affect crime rates. Crime still happens. It isn't a deterrent. And it's just really brutal. I think especially in the past year, it's shown with how prisoners have been treated during COVID, and just the plain lack of humanity that there is in those cases.
Do you feel let down by our criminal justice system?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very plainly, yes. In my book, the longest chapter actually is on the criminal justice system and the experience I had as a survivor with them. It was awful, and it was extremely traumatic. Lots of people say it's like can often incredibly be more traumatic than what happened. Which is awful.
You say in your conclusion in the book, I'm just going to read out your words to you. After all I've just said, including what you've just described about the failures of the criminal justice system, after all I've just said, I do believe there is a way forward, and that way is to care for our communities, our loved ones, and for those who are in even shittier situations than our own. No matter your identity, you can help others. So do you believe there are kind of individual acts, shifts that will kind of create a bigger change? That if we go along with your idea of abolishing prison, which you're right, there's lots of evidence to bear out the fact that they just don't work. Is it the kind of, does that not place some burden on the individual to kind of, should we all be better?
It's a very good question. Yes, at the same time, obviously the burden shouldn't just solely lie on literally individuals, but should be more of like a community move. But obviously, it's individuals within that. Yeah, so I used to be a facilitator for university, working in active bystandership and consent training. And the like main thing that we'd say within those 3-hour sessions was to do with, you do have, it's also a positive thing. You do have power as an individual to change those circumstances. And the main thing we teach about is no matter how great or small, you can have interventions. And the way we did it, we obviously trained in how to do it tactfully and how to do it in a way that's actually effective. But in situations you see, so whether it's someone catcalling someone else, or whether it's someone, a large thing we always talked about was rape jokes and people making jokes about sexual violence, and the way that that's often deemed as not that bad and it's not actually seen as that violent, but in reality it is, because I think I say in the book somewhere else, like making those rape jokes and having those lesser end acts of sexual violence, it's sort of a snowball effect into leading to other things being excused.
Of course, and normalizing that language around acts of violence as well. So, you talk about you've completed training on rape, consent, and active bystandership. How much of that should be compulsory, do you think, for young people, for people in offenders? How much of it should be made to be learned?
100%. All of it. I think that's the main thing. It is teaching people, giving people the education in how to change things, how to change the way we talk about it, how to change the way we respond to people when they disclose that they've been through something. I think it should be mandatory, definitely in high school. obviously age specific, things like that, in the way that you talk to children about it and young people about it. And then, with people who are perpetrators of such crimes, it should be the main thing in getting them to, relearn their understanding of the world, understand the harm that they've caused, and understand if they can do anything to rectify that harm, and also how to just not ever do that again.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anything else you think we can do in our collective? So our collective as women or as queer people or as Black and Asian people to create situations where we're more likely to achieve justice or to feel like there's a more level playing field?
Oh, that's a big question.
It's a bit of a big question. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Do I think level the playing field? I think community and believing one another, and and not the main thing is just believing people and giving them the space to feel comfortable to talk about what they've been through, and to talk to you, say like one of your friends was violent to someone else, making the room within yourself so that if someone did come to you, and said like, your best friend has harmed someone, to also not ostracize that person who has done the harm, but to work together to try and change that, and to try and but always centering the survivor and what they want in the situation. If they never ever want to see that person again, that's fine. They don't have to. And really then leading it.
There was a good question in the book, actually, it made me think, which was when you ask, is it better to be honest or protected? And I thought that was a really interesting question. What do you think?
I think it really depends. And I think I know exactly which bit you're talking about, because I actually read that bit last night. I think I say an interesting thing, like in response to myself in that section. I say, is it not better to be honest with yourself about what needs protecting and the boundaries that you have? Because with my situations, also like within the book even, I think it's quite interesting that I don't really talk about the things that have happened to me. There are very brief glimpses, but I don't really delve into them, because it is because of legal issues. I can't talk about certain things, and that's a whole other barrel of fish. But it's also because I need to protect parts of myself, and need to protect, my life outside of this work. So I think honesty is great in as much of a capacity as it can be, but being honest with yourself about what you can and can't do.
Okay, we're going to move on to your next big change. So I'm going to hand over to Shona.
Okay, so you say that misogyny is obviously central to my book, all different types of misogyny. Can you talk a little bit about that? And you include shame in that as well, don't you?
So I think misogyny, obviously, is a big thing to want to change about the world, but I think it is the leading cause of pain and suffering across all genders as well. Like, it's obviously women who are more violently affected by it, and who have their lives literally like ruined by acts of misogyny. But also, it's shit for everyone. Am I allowed to swear on this podcast? It's fucking shit for everyone. Like, men have a shit time too. Obviously, other people on the gender spectrum have an awful time, and it's just shit. That's my 2 pence on misogyny. But misogyny in school, I mean, what did I say? Oh, I think I say in the book, my first experience of misogyny in school was being we were playing Kiss Chase, and this man, who's a lovely man now, I'm sure. Actually, he's not even sure. He is a lovely man. I still briefly know him. We were playing Kiss Chase, and it was boys on girls, as it usually was. And he was chasing me, and he fell, and he pushed me head on into a wooden fence, and I got a really big nosebleed. And then I was crying and had to go home. I think that's a really good example of how misogyny starts really young. And just, another thing that comes to mind is, I'm sure a lot of people my age and older, it's probably still happening now. Remember in like dress codes in school, you were always told, I remember when we went into sixth form, we were told that you had to cover your shoulders, because otherwise it'd be distracting to the male teachers.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely men, and I think it was like insinuated that it was about like the male teachers, and that's your shoulders.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like
Wow.
Victorian stuff. Yeah, we weren't allowed to get our shoulders out. And I
That happens in Moxie. Have you seen that film Moxie?
Does
I
it?
really
Yeah.
want to
Yeah,
see
the
that.
Amy Poehler film. Yeah. Anyway, that is literally the exact same thing that the girls rebel against the fact that the teacher, girl, well, basically, there's a girl with larger breasts, and
Yeah.
she is wearing a vest, and the teacher asks her to cover up because it's distracting to him, and so all the girls start to wear them. Anyway, sorry.
Well, that
No,
actually reminds me of a great bit in the book about catcalling, and it's so interesting because I know that you said in the book that you did. Was it you that confronted some men about it, and there was only one that was willing to talk to you?
That's a study. That was
a study that you report on, right?
A podcaster for, was it NPR or no, for This American Life, I think.
That's right.
Eleanor Gordon Smith is the journalist's name. Yeah, she was in Australia, in Sydney.
Yeah.
She was walking down a street and confronted, is sort of a little study she was doing, confronted everyone who was catcalling her, and only one man talked about it. And even when she talked to him about it and said how awful it was and how awful it made her feel, he didn't care. He was just like,
no,
oh, but it's a compliment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm still thinking about that. It makes me so cross.
It's awful. It's disgusting. And especially, it's sunny right now. I think I say, and I still feel this now, I think I'll always feel this. Walking along the street in summertime, my saving grace is always headphones. I think I just can't hear the harassment most of the time. I'm like, haven't been harassed for a while. And then I'll take out my headphones and I'm like, oh, damn it.
That's there. The soundtrack's still there. The
exactly. Just ignore it.
Before we move on to your third thing that you would change, there was a quote in the book that I loved, and I think Catherine would love this too, where you say, "There is a special place I reserve for rage for those of us who've been so historically fucked over by abuses of power."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that rage must just be ongoing.
Yes, and that's why I'm in therapy.
But also, don't we all have some of that
Yeah.
inside us? Just
Yeah.
by virtue of the fact of existing as women in the spaces that we take up. I'm constantly being told that I'm being angry and raging.
Absolutely.
And you can kind of dispel it as you can laugh about it, but that rage is at the root of so much of our experience, I think.
Definitely. And when you get to a certain age, it's always hormonal. You're just permanently hormonal, apparently.
Yeah.
Obviously that and nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody else is being stupid shit. You're just really hormonal.
Do you feel hopeful or hopeless about the direction of travel with, Me Too and Time's Up and things, being named now that perhaps weren't named even 20 years ago? Do you think misogyny is on its way out?
I want to say yes. And I do think in a lot of ways, one thing I don't want to happen though is to people to get complacent about it. And, to think, oh, we've had Me Too, we've had Time's Up, it's fine, things have changed. There's a bloody long way to go. And there's a lot to still be unraveled. So I would say cautiously optimistic. I want to be optimistic, but it's also kind of hard when the world is so awful around.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, well, I'm going to move you on to the final of your changes.
The most important
This
one.
is a seismic, shift in the world order. So do you want to talk us through it?
I want to abolish coriander.
How very dare you?
I hate it. It's disgusting. I've hated it my whole life. My mum's obsessed with it. She puts it on everything. We had to have very serious conversations a few years ago. And it's just everywhere. Like you get a Pret sandwich, coriander. You get a banh mi, coriander. I went to Vietnam a few years ago, and this is going to make me sound so ignorant and so awful and just such a white palate. But like, I just hated the food because there's coriander in everything. So
yeah, I mean that's not the cuisine for you, is it?
It really wasn't. It was a bad place to go for coriander wise.
It could possibly one of the worst countries apart from India for you to go.
Weirdly, cooked coriander, not so bad. But I still generally abolish it because it's gross. Raw.
So I was going to ask you if you'd ever tackled this head on, like with something like a Thai broth with lots of coriander, but you obviously have done that. and it
Hate it.
hasn't worked.
Disgusting. No.
Yeah, fair. So when I read your third thing, it said everyone gets a coriander-free garden, and I didn't know whether you meant everyone gets a garden with no coriander, or everyone who has a garden has all the coriander taken out of their garden.
Both.
But
So there's a general recall on coriander. You have to pull it out of your ground, and then also everyone gets a garden, but it can't have coriander in it. And if you do coriander, then your garden gets taken away.
What's your take on dried coriander, like the herb?
So I haven't spent much time with it. I don't want to. I just really hate it. There's also a thing, you might be about to say this, that it tastes like soap. It actually doesn't, that doesn't make sense to me. It's just disgusting.
Okay, so it's not a genetic thing. If it tastes like soap,
I'm sure it is. Well, I've just never gotten the soap thing because I don't get that. I'm just like, it's rank.
No, I confess, I used to be like you, Catriona. I used to really, really hate coriander, and I don't know whether as you get older, you lose your taste, don't you? You lose literally.
Excuse me, coriander's lush. Can you stop?
And anyway, but what I wanted to do was recommend something for you to try, which is part of my rehabilitation into the coriander world. Which is something called a tequila vedita. So you have a shot of tequila, and don't try this at home, kids, if you're underage. Do try if you are overage. Shot of tequila, and you make up a mix of pineapple juice, chili, mint, and coriander, and you blitz it. And so it's like a green sort of, it looks like a health juice. It tastes like a health juice. So you do the tequila first, and then you do the vedita, and you're left with a kind of warm, excited mouth.
It's like
in
a
a
shot
good
of
way.
tequila and then a spoonful of salsa verde.
Kind of, but it's anyway. It helped me. It might help others.
Oh,
I'm just trying to help.
It's good advice. I don't think I'm going to take it. But I've accepted it. I'm never going to be into it. It's fine. And
does your boyfriend like coriander?
Enjoy it. Does he?
Yeah.
I actually can't remember. I think he's sort of like, eh. So I think it's, he'd be fine with it. He'd pass the test. He'd be allowed to have a garden.
So are you a big garden fan?
I am indeed, especially over the past year. I currently live in a flat without a garden, which is very sad. I have a very small garden out front, but it's essentially just my dog's toilet. So we don't spend tons of time there. But whenever I have been, so my parents have a really, really nice garden. My dad has reached the lovely, wholesome age where he just gardens lots, and that's really nice. He's very proud of it, though, very particular. So I do have.
Does he let you loose on it?
Oh, no.
No.
I mean, I'm obviously allowed to walk around it, but I'm not allowed to implement any changes yet, but I'm working towards it.
Okay. I hope you get there.
Yeah, just green spaces. I think the past year has really, I've gotten much more into naturalism. I mean, I grew up in like South Manchester in the suburbs, so it was always quite green, and I very much took that for granted. And then I sort of came to London when I was 18. I've been here since, and I'm really, really missing the countryside and just and peace and the garden. And I've started reading a lot more. Currently I'm reading Losing Eden by Lucy Jones, which is so good, and it's about the need of like wildlife and nature around you for your mental health and your well-being. And I've just gotten a lot more into that and see that as really important in my life now.
Did you write some of the book outside?
Did I? That's a really good question. I don't think I did. I think I mostly wrote it inside. I think that's not true. I think I mostly wrote it inside, but when I would often go for walks just with a notebook and make notes. I also often implement voice notes if I'm like walking around, around parks in London and stuff or elsewhere. I just make voice notes as things come to me, sort of. And I think that's a really helpful thing I've worked out how to do, because I often find writing stuff down, and it's just like your mind and your hand aren't going fast enough. So I feel like speaking into the voice notes can be really helpful. And then I'd use that material and write it up into the book.
We've spoken to a lot of writers that use voice notes as their kind of first pass at ideas, and then take it to the screen.
Yeah, exactly.
So after achieving your coriander-free future, what's next for you?
What's next for me? It's a good question. I am working on a few things. I do have a few. I mean, obviously the book's out in 3 weeks from when we're recording this, but I have another few things coming out with some magazines like Ablezine and Sick magazine, which are like disability centered magazines, which I'm really excited for those things to come out. And then working on a few other ideas. I'm at that space as a writer where I have so many ideas. I just need to work out which one to centre on, because I think I just get really excited by new ideas and then spend a lot of time on them when I should really be writing on other certain things. But I'm developing my proposals for my second book, which I'm hoping to have done in a few months, which talks, it will centre a lot more on disability and productivity in our world. So it's very exciting. And then, trying to get that done.
Yeah, that sounds like enough to keep you busy.
Exactly. Yeah, just about.
Well, brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been so interesting talking with you.
Thank you, Catriona. Would look forward to having you back on for the next book.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been lovely.
The World as It Should Be from Prima Donna.